Yeah, yeah. I saw that. I noticed that too. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So I was.
Okay. I was at visit. I just came all of the way back. I said, here. Okay. We'll sit there. So it's, I'm so excited.
I think I got it, but I don't want to get up.
If you sit on the ground. See, that's why I'm both kids.
Is there what? I had a person.
So for our friends in the room and our friends online, welcome back. We had an incredible morning here on the mountain at Kirkridge. And we had conversation really grounded by the wonderful iconic poem by Wendell Berry, the Kentucky farmer, The Peace of Wild Things. We are glad and grateful that our online community are joining us. Special thanks to Jesse, who is our tech guide. Thank you, Jesse. To all of you joining online, we have people from 15 states plus. And I'm not talking altered states, I'm talking geographical states. So we're delighted you're here. My name is Michael Ady, and I have the privilege of serving with Kirkridge in providing programs, and particularly those that are LGBTQ centric, and particularly for this conversation about creating safe and affirming spaces for transgender children, youth, adults, and their families. And as you know, transgender is a big umbrella term. And there are a lot of people, a lot of identities, a lot of authentic selves and life experiences underneath that big umbrella. And so we would think about non-binary, queer, gender non-conforming, all kinds of different folks under that umbrella. I strive to be an ally with the trans community. And the reason I do that primarily is because of our next keynote speaker, Reverend Dr. Erin Swenson. And we have a practice here of an applause sandwich. So we applaud and thank the speaker before and after. So welcome and thank you, Erin.
Oh, thank you, Michael. I'm glad to get it before, because you just never can tell. Yes. So we're here to get this thing kicked off. Let's do it. Let me tell you, I'm a Presbyterian minister and a psychotherapist, and I've been practicing for over 40 years in Atlanta, and I specialize in work with the transgender community. But I also have to do a little bit of disclaimer. I am white, you might have noticed. Yes, and I am, I have sort of the privilege of being an ordained minister, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that a little later. Anyway, today I've been asked to talk about family support, and I'm going to sort of move through this a little bit more quickly than I had planned. This is what I was assigned: developing knowledge and skills in how to talk with family members, being able to reach across religious and cultural chasms, divides, and how to effectively create safe and affirming spaces for gender expansive children to thrive within their home and extended family. Those three things are, could be the outline for an entire weekend retreat, We're going to do it in about an hour. Okay, so a story. I forgot to tell you, I'm also transgender. Just in case you didn't know. When I was about 10 or 11 years old, I became aware, going to school, that the girls in the school, my school went through the 7th grade. It was Georgia. So we went from kindergarten to 7, and then high school was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So I was in the 5th grade when I was 10 and 11. And I started noticing the girls changing in the school, especially the older ones in the 7th grade. And started having this real problem with realizing that the developmental path that I wanted to follow was theirs, not the one that I knew to be mine. I was not psychotic. I knew that I was a boy. At least I knew I was male. But that wasn't what I wanted. I wanted to be one of them. I also knew this was in the 1950s. How many people here can remember the 1950s? Okay, there are 4 of us. I know about them. Yeah, right. This was in the 1950s. It was in Georgia. This is not the most progressive place or time. And I knew that. I was pretty smart as a kid. And so I knew that I couldn't go to mom and dad and say, hey, mommy and daddy, I would like to grow up to be a girl and not a boy. How about that? Because I knew I would be in, I don't know what kind of trouble. I had great parents. They loved me. I had sisters. I grew up in a very loving household. So I can't blame anyone for abuse or anything like that. And I knew my parents would probably try to do something as supportive as they could. But I also knew that probably the best that I could hope for would be maybe a few years in military school. That would be the best. The worst would be sort of unthinkable. So it was a secret. I was going to keep this a secret forever. I hadn't heard anything about transgender. There was nothing in the world, unlike 10 and 11 years old today. They know about transgender. They know about being gender fluid, being non-binary, and many of them feel a lot of freedom to explore those identities without very much fear. Although I do know also that there still are kids who are 10 or 11 who live in daily fear that what they desire in their hearts is not acceptable to their families or their community. So, but for me, back in the 1950s, there was no word for it. All I knew was there was something strange. And I was really believed that I was kind of broken, that I was there were no human beings like me. And so, I somehow belonged outside of the human race. But I pretended to be human and I got through. Adolescence back in the 1950s was terrible on its own. But to do it as a transgender teenager is in the closet with myself was a nightmare. Dating was hard. I wasn't clear if I was attracted to the girls that I dated or if I wanted to be the girls that I dated. And that was all very confusing to me. And the confusion got settled after I finished high school and started Georgia Tech. I did a couple of years at Tech and went off to church camp for the summer. And there I met Sigrid. Michael knows Sigrid. She's a remarkable woman. She is bright and strong and loving, and I fell immediately in love with her. And I could not believe it. my transgender stuff, which by then was, was fertile and growing like a spring garden. It stopped. It just stopped. And because I fell so much in love with her, all I could think of was being with her. And so, Sigrid and I got married 6 months after the day we met. I had just turned 20, and she was 23. She had just graduated from Agnes Scott, and I was, because I was transferring from Georgia Tech to a Georgia State University, I lost a whole year's worth of credits because engineering credits don't go well with liberal arts degrees. So I lost a whole year's worth of credits and found myself being a first quarter sophomore, married to this woman who was, as far as I was concerned, was a princess and a goddess both. And so I couldn't believe my luck, and it cured me. It made me feel whole for about 6 months. And then I found myself on one early spring day in front of the mirror, looking at myself dressed in my wife's clothes. And I was devastated. I was just devastated. I realized at that moment that I had not been cured, and that now I had woven my life in with someone who I loved and trusted and admired. I couldn't possibly, if I told her, I knew that that would be the end of our marriage. I couldn't handle that loss. I became depressed. I became so depressed that she was scared, suggested that I go see someone to talk to. And I wasn't about to do that. Those shrinks, they can read your mind. And I wasn't going to get close to one of them because they were going to find out what was going on with me. And so I said, no, I'll handle it myself. And I did. I developed the capacity to work myself silly. I became what I guess could be called a workaholic. I was, of course, still in school, so I stayed in school, made the dean's list just about every quarter. And then I also worked full-time in retail work in downtown Atlanta. And at the same time, I did weekend work at a radio station as an engineer, Georgia Tech engineering. So I did that. That's why I can push the button on the microphone. Is I went to Georgia Tech. And that got me through. That got me through probably the next 20 years. I achieved a great deal. I got ordained as a Presbyterian minister, which is no small thing. For instance, you have to demonstrate a reading knowledge of Greek and Hebrew. And that's just one instance. I became licensed as a psychotherapist in the state of Georgia. I earned 3 graduate degrees. I built my first house myself while being the associate pastor of a church in North Georgia. I built a sailboat with a friend of mine. We put together a sailboat in my basement and sailed it. We sailed it actually in the Atlantic Ocean. It was pretty cool. I learned to fly. I did a lot of things that, sort of distracted me. But by the time I reached my mid-40s, I was running out of things to do. I was starting to explore the possibility of going to medical school when my beloved spouse said, sure, you can do that, but it'll be without me. So, I said, well, okay, maybe we can not do that. depression, the depression that I had struggled with my whole life began to overwhelm me. And I was one of those people, you know, who walk into a room, you know, they walk into a party and the temperature in the room drops about 10 degrees, you know, that kind of person. That was me. I was that person. The depression was dark and deadly. Began to form plans to end my life. In the midst of all of this, Sigrid, my beloved, was carrying on. She had already told me that when the kids left, we have two incredible daughters. They are now 52 and 45. I can't believe that I had daughters that age. But anyway, Sigrid was carrying on. She, you know, as a very strong woman, she told me that she wasn't going to live with me anymore after the kids left because I was killing her. My depression was sucking her dry. By then, she knew that I was struggling with gender stuff. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was my depression. It got worse. It really got very dark. I would come home from work at night and I would get in the car and I would go out and I would drive for hours and listen to music and cry. And come home and just sort of go to bed numb and get up the next day. You know, one of the things about being a workaholic is you learn how to go through the routine and do the next thing. So there was always, you know, I had to get up. Our younger daughter is severely disabled from a birth problem. And so she required much assistance in getting dressed and getting breakfast and all that sort of stuff. So, you know, I was up at 4 in the morning to get her ready for the school bus. And my day started at 4. And, you know, it just sort of went from there. And I got through the day, got home from work, left the house because I couldn't face my family with my depression, and went out and drove around again and came back numb and just did it all over again, day after day after day. And it was terrible. And one day I was in the bathroom getting Laura, our younger daughter who has the disability, I was helping her get dressed for school in the bathroom. And Sigrid came in and she had a bottle of pills. She said, I don't know why she did this. She gave us a little speech almost. These pills, my doctor gave me for my premenstrual, my pre-menopausal symptoms, and they don't work. And I got a new doctor and new prescription, and it works great. And she put the pill bottle in the medicine cabinet right in front of me where I could see it. She insists that that was not on purpose, that she had nothing in mind at all. I looked at the bottle, it was Premarin. I knew Premarin to be a very powerful conjugated female estrogen, female hormone, which back then, 25 years ago, was used pretty intensely with male to female transsexuals to help feminize their bodies. So I stole one of her pills. I popped it in my mouth and I finished getting Laura ready for school and had my breakfast, and I went to work. I worked with a group of psychotherapists that I had put together in Atlanta. We called ourselves the Brookwood Center for Psychotherapy. It's still there, amazingly. I went to work and my colleagues all knew about my depression. I mean, it was absolutely no secret. I couldn't have hidden it if I had to. And I went to work, and that day I was absolutely not depressed. I was, you know, it was like the pill had miraculously cured me of my depression. The sky was blue. There were colors on the earth. I felt in place. There was no hopelessness in me anywhere. I couldn't believe it. It was so powerful that my colleagues asked me to join them in the group room because they wanted to do an intervention. They thought that I had made plans to kill myself, which is, as a therapist, you look for that in people who are suicidal, because what happens is they get relieved. They make the plan, they buy the gun or they get the pills, and everything is in place, so they know that life is coming to an end, and they feel relieved and happy. And I was certainly relieved and happy, but I was certainly not about to end my life. Maybe as I knew it, but I wasn't about to end my life. And so I started stealing pills one at a time, one a day, and it continued. It was fabulous. I was on top of the world until I realized, of course, that the pill bottle was getting empty. That I was risking that Sigrid would look at it and see that the pills were gone. But worse than that, there wouldn't be any more for me. Couldn't get any more. And so it's a prescription medication, of course. And so I started making plans to forge a prescription. I had psychiatrist friends, and visiting them, it was easy to grab a few sheets off their prescription pad, their MD prescription pad, and I started practicing how to write a script for Premarin, and I was ready to do it. I had chosen a drugstore that was not part of a chain, so that they wouldn't be plugged in and couldn't check on stuff, and I was ready to do it. I woke up that morning, and I was sweating in the bed, and I had been sort of daydreaming as I was awakening, and my stomach turned, and I realized I was about to commit what in Georgia is a felony. Not only is it a felony, not only could I go to jail for it, but it would cost me my license to practice. My family's income would go to zero. I realized how dangerous it had become. I was willing to do it. I had done things like that before, all in service of my gender stuff. And so, it wasn't out of character, but it was like I had reached the end of the rope. There was no more time, no more room. I had to do something different. And what was different was I went to see a gender appropriate therapist, a therapist who worked with transgender people. Margaret convinced me that I wasn't confused about my gender. She said, Eric, that was my name back then. Eric, you're not confused about your gender. What makes you think you're confused about your gender? You know what your gender is. You're just afraid that nobody you love is going to be able to handle it, that they won't care about you. And she said, that's a terrible thing to say about the people you love, the people who love you. You're surrounded by them, and it's terrible for you to think that they would do that to you. She knew a lot about me, so she knew a lot about the people that I loved, and so I decided that I could transition. Now, you have to remember, especially those of you who are younger, this is 28 years ago. So there were only two options if you were transgender. One option was to be a cross-dresser, which I hoped fervently that was what I was, but of course I wasn't. The second thing was to transition. There was no gender fluidity. There was no bi-gendered, no gender non-conforming, none of that stuff. It was all either transsexual, transitioning, or cross-dressing. And so I started my transition, and it went great. My family accepted me. For those of you who haven't been through it, when I first told Sigrid, she was not shocked because she knew me really well. But when we told her parents, they were shocked beyond belief because they didn't know anything about that. So they were just they were almost numb. They couldn't talk. When I went to tell my family, the people I had grown up with, I decided to pick my next younger sister, who was the closest to me, and I went and I told her. The way that I told her was I wrote a letter. I was very afraid that I would start slipping around. For my whole life, I had made excuses and tried to cover for myself in all kinds of ways, and I was terribly afraid that if I tried to wing it with her, that I would do the same thing and tell her some mealy-mouthed thing about thinking that maybe I would like to possibly someday, if the way be clear, possibly maybe become more feminine. and that wasn't what I was about at all. I wanted to change my gender. So I wrote it down in 3 or 4 pages of paper and went and had dinner with my sister and her husband and read my letter to them, crying most of the way through it. And my sister was able to embrace me. And from there, we expanded that to my other sister and then to my father, who was widower at the time. My mother had died several years before. And so, my dad cried, and it's a shock. It's a shock to people. So I wasn't surprised when he told me that he went to see his pastor at his Methodist church in Hiawassee, Georgia, up in the mountains. And he met with his pastor for 3 days in his office, and they searched the scriptures for something that the scripture might say about what I was doing, and they could not find anything. There was nothing in there about gender transition. Well, do tell. I mean, for heaven's sakes. It was just not there. And so the pastor said, I just can't see that there's any reason that your son can't do this, and it's going to be perfectly okay with God. So okay. So dad got better and better, and it worked great until I realized. Sigrid said, there could be a problem with our insurance, our health insurance, which was through the Presbyterian church. My health insurance was connected to my ordination as a Presbyterian minister. And so I could not figure out what to do with it. I went and checked with the Board of Pensions and said, I'm changing my gender, and it probably would be better for me to sort of demit, that's the word, I guess, my ordination. But what would happen to my insurance? And the word was, you lose it. It's gone. Remember, I have a disabled daughter whose medical expenses were astronomical. So that wasn't an option. So I went to the Committee on Ministry, which is the sort of like the personnel committee for those of you who aren't Presbyterian. It's kind of like the personnel committee for the Presbytery. And I told them that I was changing my gender and I wanted to change my name on the roll of Presbytery so that I could continue to be ordained and continue to get benefits, including my health insurance. And the committee said, that sounds like a good idea to us. How about that? So they said, let's take it to the Presbytery. What we're going to do is we're going to put it on something called the consent docket. the consent docket is that part at the beginning of this. The Presbytery is a group of, in our Presbytery, of 120 churches, ministers and elders. So the meeting had about 300 or 400, it has about 300 or 400 people in it. And it's an all-day meeting, once a quarter. And lots of businesses transacted, all the personnel business and all that sort of stuff. Much of it is pro forma. Minutes of commissions to install ministers in churches, and certificates of baptism for people, and the death of elders, all those kinds of things get to be gathered together in the consent docket and published in the agenda for the meeting and passed all under one motion. So we're going to pass the consent docket, and my name change was in that consent docket. Sounds like a great plan, doesn't it? Yeah, I can see people saying, yes, this is the thing. The only problem with the consent docket is that someone can, any member of Presbytery can ask for something to be taken off the consent docket and put into the regular report for that committee. And it takes only one person to do that. One person stood and did that. Just so happens he had been one of my clients in my practice. Anyhow, he took it off this consent docket, and it got discussed fully. When time came to be discussed, he stood and he said, I've researched this fully, and I can find no recorded incidents where any ordained minister, not just in the Presbyterian Church, but in Protestant churches, in Western Protestant churches, no ordained minister has ever changed sex and stay ordained. And so he said, what we're doing is setting a precedent for our church, and perhaps for all of Christendom. Maybe we were setting this was what people were going to be making decisions on for years to come. And he said, I think it deserves a little more attention than just a name change on the docket. I have to tell you, I would have voted for that because it made sense to me. And when I got told that by the committee chair, I thought, I was really disappointed. But I also thought, well, this is great. I can help the chair of the committee put together a task force to study transgender issues in the ministry, and this is going to be great for me, and I'm going to be really good to go. I can be on that task force, I'm sure, and I know several other people who I've already talked to who are willing to be on it. The problem was the committee was going to have nothing to do with it. The Committee on Ministry took it under advisement, which meant they did nothing, except at the end of each meeting, they took a straw vote on my ordination, up or down. And as the months went by, and I remained in limbo, I was still ordained, of course, so I still had the insurance and everything was good. I did not know the future of my insurance. And so I was very afraid that it would be taken away. And the Presbytery executive called me one day and said, I'm really sorry, Erin. They did a great job with names and pronouns. But the committee is taking straw votes and it's going strongly against you. And I was devastated. I did not know what to do. And so I decided to do something very uncharacteristic for me. I decided that if the Presbytery was going to take away my ordination, and I was going to be able to live with that, it would have to be that they knew exactly what they were doing. I wanted them to understand why it was important for me to be ordained and why there's no problem with the presbytery continuing my ordination as a trans woman. And so I decided I was going to meet with each member of the committee one-on-one and talk with them. So over the next month, I did that. I met in their offices, we met in restaurants, in their homes. We talked, probably the average was 2 hours. They had questions. I answered them. I told them about my life and my gender and why it was important to my family that our insurance stay in place. I did all of that. And the committee came out with a unanimous decision in my favor. They reported out to the presbytery at the meeting in October of 1996 to continue my ordination. So it went to the floor of presbytery, where of course there was a fight. Presbyterians are good at fighting. We're really good at fighting. So there was a fight on the floor of presbytery, but the motion that the committee brought to sustain my ordination was passed by a vote of 186 to 161. It was that close. It was very close. 7 votes difference would have flipped it. So I was very glad. And of course, what I had wanted in the beginning was a very quiet transition. What I was really wanting, because I'm a therapist, therapists don't like publicity. Even if it's good or bad, it's not really good for your practice. Most people don't really like seeing Dr. Phil. They want to see someone who is private and discreet and who they can see without any stigma. And that's what I wanted. But of course, that got done in quickly when the story got picked up by the local newspaper. And then when my ordination was sustained, it got into Newsweek and USA Today. And so my quiet transition went away, and I had to start trying to figure out other ways of making a living, which I did for a while. There was a time when Michael Adey would every few weeks pack up a box full of mac and cheese, those mac and cheese things from the grocery store, and oatmeal packets with, and he would put a treat in there, and he would send me a care package to keep me going. That's the kind of friend that Michael is. So if you can make him a friend too. But I became the very first Protestant minister in history to retain ordination following a gender transition. I'm not sure being the first of anything is really a happy thing. But there's my story. I'll stick with it. The parts about the story that was instructive to me was, I thought, I have encouraged my patients to write letters if they're telling their family. I think it's really good to be able to put something together that you have thought about carefully ahead of time, so that you don't say, because it's very easy to say things you don't really mean, or to say things that sound different than what you intend. And so, if they want to, they can bring them in and read them to me, and I'll critique them for them. But I think that's a great idea in terms of telling families. Of course, a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old or a 12-year-old can't do that very well. But they can get an advocate to go with them, someone who has become familiar with their story, and teachers are fulfilling that role these days. They're going and sitting down with parents of trans kids and helping the parents understand the things that the teachers come to know about the child in school that the parents don't know. Of course, there are some of our legislators who are trying to take that away. So please, please vote against them every chance you get. Yeah,
I just say also
Sure,
be
Pat.
really active in your local school board, you know?
yes, the school board.
School board, because they
Yeah.
are the ones who are really making those decisions. They may be influenced by larger culture, but, you know, this goes back probably 35 years.
Yeah.
It started at the local level, and I think we need to do the same thing. So get involved in our communities and be present and get elected.
So Pat is saying that it's the local school board, which is the place where a lot of this gets decided, and to pay attention to the school board, attend the school board meetings, get elected to the school board if you can, do all of that kind of stuff. And that's absolutely great advice. Laura, my younger daughter, the one who is severely disabled, was in special education at the time, and her special ed teacher, I called her up the night before I was going to tell Laura, and the special ed teacher said, "Oh, I know about that. I had a roommate who transitioned like 5 years ago. I know exactly what you're talking about, and I would be glad to help Laura." And so she became a real advocate for my daughter and helped her a lot in the transition. So, you know, try to create teams of teachers, family members, people in the community who kids take an affinity to, the librarian, because my daughter loves the librarian, you know, who read her stories when she was younger, the doctor, the family doc. Get all the people on your side that you can, so that the child is surrounded by loving, well-informed adults. We got lots of family. I love pictures of families. Have you ever seen the book called The Family of Man? It's obviously very old because of the title. It's a photographic essay of the human family. It's a wonderful book. All shapes and sizes, colors, textures, families that are all the same height, and families that look like New York City. Okay. We're doing great. Any questions so far? I guess I haven't said anything that you could question. Okay, cool.
Erin, let's check online.
Check online. Any questions from online? No, we're good. I happen to believe that knowledge is power. And I think that when we talk about who we are and our history, it's very important to understand where we come from. When do you think that the transgender movement began? Timum can't answer, and neither can Sue, huh?
In American culture
Okay, American culture.
that's one of the questions
In Western culture, let's leave. I mean, transgender experience transcends even Western culture.
Yeah, because
So,
I was gonna bring up about the 5 genders in Indonesian culture,
okay,
and they have cis male, cis female, male that identifies as a female, female that identifies as a male, and then they have Biha, which is like this religious leader, and he embodies everything.
Biha, yes.
And so, you know, it seems like that's the way it should be everywhere.
Perfect. That is, you win the prize. That is exactly the answer. From some of the earliest, even pre-recorded history, we know that groups of people tended to elevate their one or more of their members to a special status, because this person had exhibited wisdom, had success in curing illness, and that person typically had religious credentials. We call them shaman in sort of most anthropology calls them shaman, although, you know, the culture in which they were didn't use that word. We do. But they were people who were recognized as different. And very often, the shaman was above gender. It wasn't transgender, but the shaman, as you said, you know, was transcended gender. Gender was too human for the shaman. The shaman was above gender, kind of like in Genesis chapter 1, where it says, God created humans, male and female. God created them. In his own likeness and image, God created them. That and, male and female, in the Hebrew is not an exclusionary and. It's not male and female as in distinct male and female. It's male and female, meaning male through female. Everything that's in between. And of course, we know that there are people who transcend even male and female. So that's pretty cool. Okay, I'm gonna zip through this and show you my wonderful timeline. It's just a way of sort of helping. Yeah, you can see it. On the left-hand side, it says 550 BCE. And in Isaiah,
You're going to talk about Isaiah
56, yes. Yes, Isaiah 56. Yes. Right. Isaiah recognizes and claims eunuchs as members of the household of God. Right. Jesus' teachings mentions intersex. Matthew, right? Sue's checking me. We're not going to get too much into this. You'll get into this more. 1400 in the Common Era, Joan of Arc. A lot of people don't know that Joan of Arc was a transgender warrior, but she was. She was burned at the stake, of course. A lot of people think that she was burned at the stake because of what? Because of her religion, for religious faith, but she was actually burned at the stake because she refused to wear women's clothing.
dressed as a male going into battle.
That's right. And her refusal, they gave her several warnings. She was told that bad things would happen if she didn't comply with their requests. She did not comply with their requests, and ultimately she was burned at the stake. There are lots of stories about that burning, including that they put the fire out after the clothing had been burned off, and wanted to demonstrate to the world that she was not in fact a man. Which of course a lot of people believed because she was such a fierce warrior. In 1860, in American history, and she was just, Sarah Emma Edmonds was only one of the many women who served in the Civil War as men. In fact, she was awarded the Grand Army of the Republic, which at that time was the highest award for wartime service for men. And she was awarded as a man for that. And of course, later on, she came out as a woman. And she is the very first transgender person to make hay on her gender transition. She then published a book about it, and it was very, very successful. We think of 1930 as the date of the first modern a transsexual surgery. It wasn't Christine Jorgensen in the 1950s. It was a, I'm going to block on her name. She was Austrian. Oh my goodness. There was a movie made about her transition. What was it?
The Danish girl.
The Danish Girl. Yes. And her name was? Don't remember. Okay. I'll remember it and tell you at dinner. Christine Jorgensen was probably one of the most famous transgender people in the early 1950s. If you don't remember, then your parents certainly do.
A comment, please?
Lily is the person who got that.
Lily, that's right. Lily Elb. Lily Elb. Yes, Lily Elb. The movie, The Danish Girl, the movie is, you know, for me, I think as a transgender person, the movie absolutely, I cried for an hour afterwards. I mean, I was in bad shape, but I would recommend it if you would be interested in that. It's a very interesting movie on early trans surgery, yeah, I think you can get it easily. John Money is not often brought into the picture, but John Money was the very first scientist to introduce the idea that there was something called a gender identity. We throw it around like crazy these days. Gender identity is part of life. It's part of who we are. We're going to talk more about that in some other talks later on, and I've got a slide that just sort of introduces it. But gender identity is different from what your genitals say, or even what your history is. Your gender identity is the sense inside of yourself of who you are. It's simply that, and it is powerful, and it is not governed by any other outside thing. No church, no politician, no parent, no teacher. No one can govern your gender identity. It is part of who you are and part of your inner expression. It's part of, I would say, how you were created. Okay, let's move on here. Oh, this is a Korean shaman, and you can see that the shaman is carrying is wearing a man's hat and is carrying a women's fan in Korean culture. So, if today, by any chance, you are transgender or gender nonconforming or gender queer, or if in any way you transgress cultural gender norms and roles, which probably includes everybody, you belong to an ancient people, an honorable ancient tribe. I mean, there was a time not long ago where if you identified as a woman, you would not be seen caught dead wearing a pair of jeans in public. Okay, this is a gender unicorn. You're going to see this person more later, I think. And I just want to show you for a second how complex we are as people. We're talking at the very top about gender identity, which is that sense inside of yourself. And you notice that the unicorn is thinking about the rainbow. So gender identity is that inside of your brain. Gender expression is what you do, and you can see the green dots on the left side of the gender unicorn, sort of trying to suggest how the unicorn behaves and uses its body. And then we have sex assigned at birth, AMAB and AFAB. Have you ever heard of those acronyms? Announced female at birth and announced male at birth. I've begun to see those acronyms show up on applications for doctors' offices and things like that. They're asking, what was your gender announced at birth? It's very important to answer that honestly, by the way, because when you're talking about medical things, you're talking about stuff that needs to take into account systems that may or may not have been affected by your gender transition. And then we have two more, which even make it, of course, gender identity is not the same things as sexual attraction. But this gender unicorn not only has sexual attraction, physically attracted to women, men, or others, but also has an emotional attraction. We notice that our kids have affinity, and we as adults have affinity and get attractions to people who are all kinds of genders. And it doesn't mean that we want to climb into bed with them, but it means that we're attracted to them. We like to hang around them. We like to be with them. We want to support them. We might even love them, but we're not necessarily going to have sex with them. So take a look at that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's just got to do with the sexual gender part of life. Think of how complex we all are. It's amazing. Toby, you've got a big job. Peter. Oh.
Cedar. Like the tree.
Cedar.
Yeah.
Cedar. Oh, I just saw Cedar's hair. Hi. I thought you were Toby. Where's Toby? Yeah. So the idea that it's not binary, that biological sex is not binary, is new to some people, but it's true. If you've read Anne Fausto Sterling, you'll come to understand that biological sex is a very complex thing. And the fact that so many of us turn out to be pretty clearly male or female is kind of a miracle because it happens often enough. We're just not gonna. This is sort of a picture when you're conceived in the very first weeks of life in utero. You really don't have a gender. In fact, it would probably be best to describe the gender of babies for the first 6 weeks in uterus as a female. That's the basic form of humans. Humans basically are female, not male. Fundamentally, men are women with extra added stuff. It's different than how you've been taught. And I know it's probably a little bit hard to embrace, but it is true. This is an example of it, and it shows how the precursor symptoms in the fetus develop under the influence of hormones. If testosterone is present, the apparatus all turns out to be male. You get the whole male thing. The vas, the testes, the epididymis, all those parts of male anatomy grow. If testosterone is not present, for whatever reason, if it's not present, the child will always develop as a female. And that is regardless of the chromosomes. So if people tell you the chromosomes determine sex, you can tell them, come on in, have a seat.
Sorry.
No, it's great. We got plenty of room. Okay. Yeah. And, yeah. Gender identity. This is my definition. The internally held sense of being yourself. I like that. That just sort of gets at everything. The internally held sense of being myself, whether that's male, female, or some other sense, we don't know. But it's just the internal sense of being myself. I think it is a wonderful thing to discover that part of humanity. We're gonna move through this. Yeah, 10 after. I try to make the case that everybody transgresses gender. At one time or another, somehow or another, everybody transgresses gender. So, you know, we somehow behave and act like a different gender than how we feel. Transgender identity is not a mental illness. I hope nobody here has that impression. It used to be considered to be a mental illness, and it was listed in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Illnesses as transsexualism. Now, the only listing that you will find is one called gender dysphoria. And that doesn't mean being transgender. That means having discomfort about your gender. People who are transgender often feel gender dysphoric, but it's probably because the world around them makes them feel gender dysphoric, not because they have that sense inside of themselves. Okay, using the word phase, of course, I'm preaching to the choir here. Using to the phase, oh, it might be just a phase, can be, and usually is damaging to gender non-conforming, to a gender non-conforming child or adolescent. It is not just a phase. Some commentators will try to point at the increasing, the billowing numbers of gender non-binary, gender fluid, middle schoolers and high schoolers and youth, and say that huge number can't possibly be because there are that many transgender people. And you know what? They're dead wrong. What's happening, and this is my commentary, you know, what is happening around us and why this is all happening is that because people have been coming out for years and we've been teaching about transgender and we've been trying to normalize transgender within the community, our youth are finally catching on and discovering that. And the painful and difficult journey of middle school and early high school when kids go through gender brainwashing. I call it brainwashing because that's what it is. They are brainwashed. Our girls are brainwashed into thinking that they have to wear makeup or else they're not feminine enough. The boys are brainwashed into thinking that they have to be bullies or they're not masculine enough. And all of that is damaging to them because that's not exactly how they feel. Some girls like to be ultra femme, but not all girls. In fact, most don't. And so we make gender a kind of a costume that our kids have to put on and conform to in order to be acceptable in our world. And what's happening is our youth are catching on to that. They're discovering that and saying, no, 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 we are not going to play that game anymore. We're going to move ahead and we're going to express ourselves as we feel we are. And that's the reason for the explosion. And that's why it's not a phase. It's going to be around forever. You like that?
Yeah.
Okay, I do like that. Almost 100% of gender expression is learned. I know that because I teach it every day. Girls don't act like girls because of some biological thing. They act like girls because they watch other girls and learn how to act like girls. For instance, there was a point in my work where I had to move from my Brookwood Center for Psychotherapy office to my own private office. And so I had to move to a different building. Unlike my previous building, my new building had a lobby. And the elevator came up from the parking deck on one side of the lobby, and you had to walk across the lobby to another elevator to go up into the tower where my office was. So I started having this daily walk across the lobby. And of course, I was wearing my very discreet business suit and heels. And I was very much like all the other women in the office building. And the problem was I started bumping into men. I started crashing into men. I mean, I would just collide with these guys in the lobby while I was crossing, and I could not figure out what was wrong. I took the problem to my therapist, and I said, Sally, I just don't understand it. I keep crashing into men. Sally said, well, Erin, maybe you need to rethink your sexual orientation. Because I had maintained that I was only attracted to women, and that was that. She said, well, maybe that means that you're attracted to men. Maybe. And I said, no, I don't think so. It just can't be. So I kind of left it for a while. A couple of weeks later, I was sitting outside having lunch on a bench outside the building, and I was watching people again. And I realized that men and women walk differently in public spaces. It's not that their gait is different. They travel differently in open space. Men tend to travel in straight lines. They go from where they are to where they're going. Makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Women, though, tend not to do that. They tend to deviate from the straight line. So that they can get a better look at the flowers on the flower stand, or maybe to say hi to a friend over on the corner. But and what they also do is they give the right of way to men.
Yes.
When a man is walking in a straight line, a woman will slow down or speed up or do anything to avoid making him change his course, because a woman knows that he's not going to change his course. And I didn't know that. I did not know that that's what happened. And so we would crash into each other. I realized, that in order to be a woman, I was going to have to learn to give men the right of way. This was a terrible dilemma for me. Feminist me. I had been a feminist for years and years. And, I was not about to give the right of way to men. So, we're going to have to figure out another way of solving this problem. Except that a few weeks later, I realized that I wasn't bumping into men anymore. And I realized even more that I had automatically started walking like every other woman. I had been conditioned to do it just like all the other women who were my sisters. So it's gendered behavior is very learned, and it can be unlearned also. These are just some of the terms. This is an old slide, so it doesn't contain some of the newer stuff. Pangender is probably sort of one of the, and a neutral. Demi boys and demi girls are very popular among the middle school crowd. So biological sex is not really binary. Biological sex. We haven't even talked about psychological sex. Biological sex is not binary. Pat.
Actually,
Oh, sorry.
I'm gonna pass
I
on.
have a question about
Okay.
I don't.
You never heard that?
I know it's demisexual.
Okay. What's demisexual?
Emotional attraction is required for sexual. I identify as
okay.
demisexual, but I've never
Okay.
been in terms of gender.
A demi boy would be someone who would have an affinity toward being a boy, but stay being a girl. In sort of like that same way, you have to have the attraction to that without necessarily, and in middle school, it's very popular because you can go home and just be a boy or a girl. At school, you can be a demi boy or a demi girl, and that works. Okay. We're going to also talk more about intersectionality. I think we've talked a little bit about intersectionality with disability and particularly, especially hearing. This is only just one little chart out of, I mean, you could put together intersectionality charts that are gigantic. Intersectionality between gender identity and STEM education. Intersectionality between gender identity and handedness, left to right handedness. Intersectionality between gender identity and being on the autism spectrum. All of those are intersectionalities that exist and more. You know, in fact, intersectionality is what happens when a person endeavors to live a transgender life. There's an intersection between their life and all the complexities that they bring and gender identity, which is its own requirement. This was a statistic that sort of, in terms of intersectionality, that sort of blew me away. Yes.
Could you elaborate on intersectionality and right and left-handedness?
There have been studies that among people, and this was a long time ago, so we're talking about transsexuals, that among transsexuals, left-handedness is more prevalent than it is in the general population. 41% of Black transgender people are homeless at some point in their life. They're unemployed at a rate of 26%, which is, I mean, the unemployment rate for Black Americans is high, is much higher than it is for white Americans. It's not this high. And, you know, it's probably higher now. This is an old study. 34% of Black transgender people have a household income less than $10,000 a year. Can you imagine trying to live on $10,000 a year? 20.23% HIV status. We had a study in Atlanta in 1993 or 4 that studied the street population and discovered that the HIV incidence among trans women on the street was 67%. Yes.
And I noticed that we were talking about that, and I think it also intersects with the fact that it's been studies done and show that when Black women, even cis Black women, go to the hospital, doctors don't treat them as radically as they would a white woman, because they feel like Black women can take the pain, Black women can deal with the issues and things like that.
They don't need the good medicine.
Yeah, they don't need the good medicine. They can bear through it.
49% of Black transgender people, according to this study, have attempted suicide. The actual suicide attempt rate for all transgender people is 41%.
I will say, and you're going to hear this afternoon, that among transgender youth, the suicidality rate, the attempted suicide, thinking about suicide, planning suicide, any kind of suicidality related, depending on the study, is anywhere from 41 to 49%. For the percentages of their peers, right, transgender children, adolescents, and their peers, the peer rate is 3%.
Yeah, well, it's very low for children.
Very low.
Yes.
So that is why, but I'm going to start preaching now. That is why the goal is to keep these kids alive.
Right.
Because we have to be,
Harm
we have to
reduction,
be the
using
hope,
harm reduction models.
right. So
Right.
we have to be the hope bearers for them.
Right.
when they cannot see this for themselves. That is
Sue,
part of our job.
for those of you at home, Sue is elucidating on this theme and describing for us that trans youth have a suicide rate of somewhere between 41 and 49%, and that their non-transgender peers, their age group, have a suicide rate of 3%. Okay. I just want you to know about this. SOC stands for Standards of Care. And the standards of care are, ooh, come on, what's going on? Have we stopped? Okay. The World Professional Association for Transgender Health maintains the standards for the treatment of people who are transgender or gender nonconforming. And they're in their, I think we're developing the 8th edition of that now. It's a very comprehensive look. The committee that puts it together is a multidisciplinary committee, which does include transgender individuals and transgender professionals. It's WPATH that describes the standards of care that really it influences the treatment. We used to think of it as governing the treatment for transgender people, but it's mostly guidelines for treatment for people who are transgender. And fortunately, it's become more sensitive to intersectionalities with race and religion.
There's also US PATH, right, which is the United States division of the WPATH, right, which helps set standard of care.
Right, for the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is something important to know because there are people that are still trying to do it. You know, treatment that is aimed at trying to change an individual's gender identity. Remember, we said gender identity is the sense of who I am on the inside. Can you imagine the endeavor of trying to change who you think you are on the inside? It's like, you know, it just seems like the most violent, ugly thing that you could possibly do. But there are people that are still attempting it, and it has been proven to be unsuccessful over and over and over again. And we have, you'll have this. I think we're going to send these out so you can have these and read them in gender nonconform. This is my timeline that I like to use with politicians who are denigrating the work that we do with kids. The line with the circles are ages. I think you can read those. And if you'll notice, it goes from before the age of 5 to beyond the age of 18. So it pretty much covers youth. You'll notice that the line called social transitioning extends from before 5 to after 18. That is the purview of gender professionals and gender treatment programs for all ages. All ages. Now you notice it's got nothing to do with castrating anyone or forcing hormones on anyone or trying to condition someone to be a gender that they're not. You'll notice that somewhere during puberty, and I've listed up there Tanner stage 2 for those of you who are familiar with adolescent physical development. We can use puberty delaying hormones. And this is done in order to allow the child to have more time to make a decision. And that's reversible. At 16, children become eligible for what's called hormone replacement therapy, which is a misnomer. We're not replacing anything. we're doing hormonal sex reassignment is what we're doing. So we're applying hormones that are going to help the person develop as the gender that they feel themselves to be on the inside. So the inside and outside will be congruent with each other. It's tremendous when a kid can get puberty delaying hormones, go on HRT early, and their body gets to develop the way that they, and this is a pure miracle of modern science. Seeing these kids go through this experience is just amazing. You know, for me, who, you know, I went on HRT at the age of 47. So, so there wasn't much that it could do. You'll notice down here, irreversible surgery, talking about things like top surgery or bottom surgery, those kinds of things that are, they're not completely irreversible, but they are, you know, we consider them to be irreversible. Don't become available until the person becomes an adult. So we are not castrating children. We're not herding them into hospitals for unneeded surgeries. We're not doing anything like that. Jump to the end. Here we got close, 58. Oh yeah, there's some really great things about, oh, and this is my model for, how people, understanding how people accept us. I think the lowest level is tolerance. Like churches that tolerate trans members, they don't celebrate them, and they don't let them have leadership positions within the church. They don't use them. That's tolerance. That's just allowing them to be there. Respect is the recognition of human value. So it adds human value to tolerance, so that those places that have come to respect transgender people can use them. Most welcoming churches and welcoming denominations practice respect in their communities. Acceptance is the thing that every trans person that I know of wants from their family. They want acceptance. And what acceptance means is that I struggled with this. How do I get my father, who knew me for 47 years as his oldest son, who he was proud of and who accomplished a great deal in life, how does he change that to now being the eldest of 3 sisters? How does he make that shift? I mean, I could not figure out how in his mind he could change that. And I realized he could do that because he respected me. He respected who I was. He was at the level of respect. So he could use the pronouns that I asked him to use, and he could use the name that I asked him to use, because he respected me. Not that he accepted me. Acceptance is different. Acceptance is when the new gender, the new name is embedded within consciousness so much that it is completely accepted. So I don't have to stop and think about what pronoun to use. And I never make a mistake with pronouns, because I view her as a woman, not as a trans woman. I just view her as a woman. I accept her as a woman. I was at a trans conference recently with a colleague, and we had been doing workshops together. My colleague was cisgender woman, and very, very well respected in the trans community. And we were in the section with the fetish clothes, and she found a petticoat or a tutu, and she had slid it over her pants and put it on, and was dancing around, like having fun. And she said to me, she said, "Erin, do you remember?" Because we're both Yankees, we're both from up north. And she knew that. She knew that I was a Yankee, and she accepted that I was a Yankee. Do you remember when our mothers used to make us wear snow pants under our skirts when we went to school? Because that's what did. I mean, girls had to wear snow pants because it was too cold and the snow was too deep. And so if they wore skirts to school, but they had to wear snow pants under them. She looked at me and she said, and that's, Virginia only ever knew me as a woman. I mean, she knew I was trans, so I mean, that was not a problem, but she accepted me as a woman completely because she mistook my childhood as a girl's childhood. She thought that my childhood matched hers because we were two women. And that is an example of what acceptance is. Remember, you and all of your children are miracles of creation. While as parents, you cannot hold the keys to who your child is. You can't do that. You do have access to your child's self-esteem. You and all of your children are powerful advocates for the larger transgender community. And each of you can make a tremendous difference in the world. That's the end. There it is. Woo!
So for our friends online and our friends on the mountain, thank you so much for being here for us to listen and learn from Erin. And let's give her one more round of appreciation and love. We're approaching our time for lunch and time is moving on. For the afternoon, I want to make sure we're synchronized, both here on the mountain and online. And so at 1:30 Eastern time, Sue will present, and then at 4 o'clock, Tim will present. Schedules changed a little bit. It was different online, but this is what it is going forward. And I do know that there probably are questions and conversations that, because Erin, you stirred up a lot for us. And so we're going to have time to be together around table in our conversations. If the folks online have questions, what I know about Erin is that Jesse, let's capture those. And then Erin, we'll figure out a way to have you respond in text and writing, and we'll send that to everybody on the list, because the people who've registered, we have your email address, and as well as the persons who are here on the mountain. So I just want to be in good faith to say, I know there's more. Pat? Sure. So we're going to lunch in just a few minutes. At 1:30, we come back, 1:30 Eastern time, to be with Sue. We have, and then at 4 o'clock, we come back to be with Tim. Okay?
Okay, so it's what's on our,
Yes.
it was on the website that it was slightly different, but the paper's good. Okay.
So I mentioned at the beginning, the primary reason why I strive to be an effective and helpful and not harmful person, and to be a trans ally, is because of Erin. But it's also about Erin's daughter. And I am compelled to share this story because Laura is also a reason why I want to be an ally. And we were in Atlanta a few years ago at Oakhurst Presbyterian Church, and I was sitting at the front. Laura was in her motorized wheelchair to my left. The prelude, the music had not started. That's important. It was completely quiet in this church. Erin was setting up the communion table, and I'm trying to get it right. I'm an educator, I'm a human rights activist, I'm trying to get it right. And I'm thinking, I've got to get the pronouns all lined up. I'm going to get it right. And so I turn to Laura and say, Laura, you know, I really appreciate your mom, Erin. She's a wonderful pastor. Laura turns to me and with a very loud, clear voice says, Sigrid is my mom, Erin is my dad. Oh dear God, I had gotten it wrong. And I just wanted to fall into the linoleum and you know, and end up in China or somewhere because I got it wrong. And it was a wonderful lesson. And afterward, in the coffee hour, Erin, of course, heard that exchange between Laura and me. And Laura was just simply correcting me. But I was trying to get this in my head sorted out. Laura had already been on that journey. Laura knew that Erin was her dad and Erin. And that's certainly a much more expansive way to think about identity and gender and relationships and names and pronouns. And then Erin at the coffee hour shared with me. What did I share with you? Well, what you said was, I heard that exchange between Laura and you were trying to do the right thing, Michael. But then she said, Erin said, Laura knows who I am. I am her father and I am Erin. Thank you, Erin. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. You tell that story so well.
So let's go to lunch.
Thank you, guys.